So before we start, we're going to cover just a few of the housekeeping rules here. Your audio can be heard through the computer or by using your call-in information located within your webinar registration email. If you can hear me, please add a comment to the questions section, or during our webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them at any time so that we can answer them. So I am Robin Kamucheka, Technical Application Specialist with Denovo Software, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Greg Beltry and Holly Bonar. And today we're going to be covering managing data in FCS Express for advanced analysis. So why is data management important? I've highlighted those that I find most important. One is productivity. With good data management, you'll be more organized in the FCS Express workspace and be able to get more analysis completed in a shorter amount of time. You will have an easier time using FCS Express, creating or reusing analysis layouts, and relaying important information about your analysis results. Efficiency. Making things easier and readily available will always increase the efficiency of completing analysis in FCS Express. And with proper data management, you'll know exactly how to get the information out of your data files, add new information to data files if needed, and optimize the use of your data. And flexibility. Great data management makes it easier to adjust your analysis efficiently to obtain the best results in FCS Express, whether you're starting from a blank layout or adjusting an existing template to meet new research objectives. With proper data management, you'll have that flexibility to respond quickly to any changes. Accurate decision making. This one's also extremely important, right? Whenever we're coming into our workspace, we want to be able to establish a data management approach that's going to help streamline analysis to make sure analysis is consistent, and have a solid plan for our data management so that you can make accurate decisions based on what your data files are displaying on how to go about creating that analysis strategy and highlight your findings. So I'd like to point out that there are many different approaches to managing data, and I won't be able to address every unique situation, but I will try to cover as much as I can today. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. The more integrated and attentive that you are in asking these questions, the more that we can give you feedback about how to do some things that you need to accomplish in FCS Express. So a few of the things that we're going to be going through today on today's webinar are user options, creating new data files or using virtually created data files, using keywords from data files or adding in new keywords or extra keywords, how to use our data list and data navigator to work with our data, adjusting analysis strategies. Now this one's going to be integrated kind of all through the flow, so you'll see multiple different ways how I'm adjusting analysis as we're proceeding through this webinar. And then I have things like data-specific gates and iteration snapshots, then managing iterations using panels and controls, and then the pipeline features and batch processing. So let's go ahead and just jump in. I've built a lot of the background analysis so that we can really concentrate on the data management portion of the webinar today. So the first thing I want you to notice is on this plot, I'm going to maximize it here for us. You see that I have like this double parameter showing, right? I have side scatter, forward scatter, forward scatter. Now, this all plays into part of data management. So for me, I always start with user options. That's really an important place where I can start telling FCS Express how I want to handle my data. So from files and options, we open that FCS Express user options window. And here you'll see that we have some options with data loading. And if I expand out my FCS file options, I have instrument specific settings. So some of these settings, like the one we just looked at, I'll go to our default FCS file here, will be for how that parameter name is displayed. Right now I'm showing stain and name. It's showing a duplicate, so I'm just going to bring it back down to stain. Now also in this same window, you'll see that we have a bunch of different instruments. This is important because if I have data that's coming off of a specific instrument, I may need to adjust how it's appearing. I might want to change the scatter parameters or how labels are being used or their fluorescent parameters. We can adjust those range options or scale options. Really makes working in FCS Express better. And then some of these features, after we make the change, if I go back into my layout and use my refresh button on the data tab, I can use these new settings right away. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is kind of more advanced is some data instruments, some acquisition instruments rather, create data files that contain data sets within a single data file. So on our FCS file options, we can actually allow to bring in those multiple data sets. So we check this box here. And then when we're going to use something that has multiple data sets, we can also change our open data dialog window. So I'm going to go ahead and use advanced data dialog window here. Okay. So I'm going to get some of these set up here. And now I'm going to just bring out my data list here so we can have it docked to the side and start working through our data list. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to that data tab and use that refresh button, recheck just my one data file here. And now you've seen those parameter changes have updated with that changing that I did in my FCS user options. Now let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like if we're going to add a data file that has multiple data sets. So I'll click on this blue plus icon here. I'll use my select data file. Now I know the advanced open data file window can look a little different than just our standard data file. The beauty of it is in this advanced set open data file window, we can use our data list. So you can use the data files that are already showing here. You can use active files. So it kind of gives you another way to access your data in a different way. And then you can, of course, go to a browser or browse through your folders and get to the data as well. So I'm going to go to my FCS files. I'm going to do the data set files. I'm going to grab that data set file here and just do open file. Now you can see at the bottom of this window here, I have tons of different data sets. I think there's 41 here. So it would be a lot if you had to go back and check each of these individually. So if you right click in this bottom space, you can select them all. And now all of these data sets that are built in within this FCS file are now going to come into my workspace. And I'm going to click OK here so that you can see them now added into my data list. So now we're just going to focus on the bottom here. So I'm going to move to that data sets page. And on this data set page, the files within this data set have actually different parameters. So if I was normally functioning in FCS Express, I could use my next and back files toggle here to move through my data file or even the iteration numbers. But because I'm working with these new parameters, I'm just going to go ahead and drag that file on to show you how it's changing here. And so you can work with these data sets. It would be working like if you had multiple different data files, but again, we're just bringing in the data sets that were confined in the one data file. So now, just to keep my workspace a little cleaner here, I'm going to go ahead and delete out this data files, and we're going to go back to our analysis plots. Now, with our analysis plots, we've got that stain parameter updated, but now I just want to show you a couple of other tools and features in our data list, because our data list is really a great place where we can start organizing our data, setting us up for the best analysis strategy. We want to have some consistency and be able to work here. So one of the things that we can do, we can resort things. We can sort things by just using the file name. You'll see it had reordered my files down below here. All my controls are together. All my treatments are together. A quick undo will bring that back to where we were. We can also add keywords. So here, it's our keyword token here, little wrench icon rather, we can go in and add some of the keywords. So these are any of the keywords that are falling within our data set. This is the information that we put in at acquisition. And sometimes it's great. We can pull out all of the things we need. We were able to put all the information that we needed into that acquisition. And so they're now all reported with our data file. But sometimes we need to use extra keywords. So amazing thing about FCS Express is that you can create these extra keyword files and they can be applied to multiple different data sets. So right now you see all my file names and you have multiple different extra keywords that I've added in here. After I've created this, I can keep it and load it into the folder with my data files. And now wherever I use these data files in FCS Express, whether it's a layout I've already created or if I'm building something new, I'll have access to these keywords. So I only have to create this one time, and then I'll be able to use this as often as I need to. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And now I'm going to move just to our second data file because the second data file is in the folder that actually has these keywords. So we'll be able to see the differences here when we go to view the keywords here. And I know this is kind of quick because we looked at that first one through the other window to look at the keywords. We looked at that through the data list, and here we're looking at it through the view header on our data tab. So I'm just going to take a quick look. Sample ID is one, our type is another, and then I think media is here, concentration and condition. We'll cancel back out of that, and then we can actually see these extra keywords together. So this is the same data file, 1 and 2. 1 is without those extra keywords, and 2 is with those extra keywords. And I've just highlighted some of the elements here that we've added with those extra keywords. Now let's go back to our analysis plots again, and we're going to go through a little bit more here in the data list and how we can use this. Now, our data list is actually a great management tool because we have some features here where we can actually do a merge in real time. So we won't have to go and create this actual data file. We can use like a virtual merge here to make sure that we can, maybe when I want to look at what's happening in these data files before I commit to creating a new data file. So we'll go to the data files here. We'll select them all in our window, and then we'll change and use our merge FCS files. Now, when I click on open file and I click again OK, it's going to add it to my data list. And now you can see I have this merged data file down here at the bottom. When I click, it's now going to be displayed on these plots here. And then if I go to my merged data file, you can see here, I am able to still parse these apart. So even though I've brought them in as a merged data file, I can use my file identifier and still separate these data files so I can look at them one by one. Again, just ways to manage this. This can be great if we're doing our downstream analysis and we're including TSNEs or UMAPs. We started from a merged file, and now we want to see how each file is contributing to the shape or the form. This is a place that we can do that. We can create gates here on the file identifiers, and then we can separate these things out from that merged data file and see how things are contributing to the shapes or the islands and regions created in UMAPs and TSNEs. So with this also, I want to take a moment to look at compensations. When we're doing compensations, we can always add our own compensation, or it can pull it from FCS files if you did it on your acquisition instrument. Now, if any time that you see that you have a compensation matrix that you want to use, maybe, all my files right now are actually using the same compensation matrix. So I'm just going to show you how I would set this to default. I'm going to go ahead and just copy one. I'm going to paste it into the created manually. Maybe I wanted to add some adjustments or modify, or just had build something else here. If I right click on this, I can set as default. Now my data files will all use this as their default when I'm moving through my data list. So I'm going to go back to our analysis plots here. And I'm also going to just click on this second data file to go back there. And now what I'm going to show you is how we're going to start using this data file to create some virtually gated data. Now, virtually gated data can be really great if we want to look and focus on a specific population. Again, if we didn't want to commit to creating that file yet, we just kind of wanted to explore our data set and see what it could offer and make decisions about what would be the best way to go. We can just do this virtually. So if we click on a sample and use our right click menu, we can, accidentally changed that. Let me back that up one. There we go. We can create gated data. So when we get into this gated data window, we have the same options that we do in other places in FCS Express. We can choose all gates. We can choose only the ones that are checked below, or we can exclude those that are checked. I'm going to go ahead and expand all our gates so we can just look at them at one time. So I'll check our lymphs, our CD3, our CD4, and CD8, and then click OK. And now I'm going to have 4 new virtually created data files that I can use. So I have my virtual merge data file here, and then I have these data files. And I can just look here and start looking at these populations of interest and see how information is changing as I'm looking at these different gated populations. It can be a really nice way and a quick way to get information about your data, to export it in a format that works really well for you, and to give you the information that you want from a specific population. Now, I know you can see that we've done this in this data list here, but now you're probably asking, okay, Robin, that's really great to have some virtually created data, but what happens if I actually want to create new data files? We can absolutely do that in FCS Express. On our data tab, under batch export, we can actually create new files here. So we can do a couple of different things. One, we can add our data. We can do it from the standard or advanced open data dialog. I'll go ahead and use the advanced so that I can show you how you can use like the data list files here. and start doing some things here. And I'm just going to add our first, I think 9 or 10 samples, and click OK. So you have the flexibility to export these as individual files, and you can choose formatting. So you don't have to choose just an FCS file format. If you needed a CSV, if you wanted to use DNS data stream files, which are files that are specific to FCS Express, you have flexibility on how you want to export these individual files. You also get to determine where it goes. And then you can change the name. So if you're maybe saving these in the same folder as the original folders, you can add something. This little asterisk here will maintain the original name. If you type before, you can add something like gated or whatever information would be necessary for you to identify those later. Another thing that's fantastic is we can export these with compensation. So if I did my compensation in FCS Express, but now I want this compensation to be part of my data file, I can add this compensation here. I can actually add export with transformations also. Now, this is great because if I'm doing the work, maybe I'm doing some data cleanup using Flow AI or Flow Cut, I can come in here and I can create that pipeline step, and then I can export my data files cleaned up. And I won't have to worry about seeing those outliers. It'll be nice, clean data and ready for my analysis. Furthermore, I can use a gate. So if I'm interested in just looking at a gated populations, maybe I just want only my lymphs to be part of this export, I can select that here and then create that new data file that's only going to be, it's going to have the compensation, it's going to have my Flow AI, and then it's going to have the population of interest. Additionally, if I click the second button here, I can export as a merged file. Now this is great because we have the same options like we did for individual files, but we can change that file type to, again, the CSV, DNS data files. I really like for my merged data files to use our DNS file because then we can select two options for our file identifier and our classification identifier as well. Merge data file, and I'll click Save, and then just create these. So that file identifier is what we saw at the bottom of that merged data plot. And that's how we can separate back out from a merged data. We want to be able to separate things back out, bring them together and separate them out as needed while we're working through our data. Again, here, if you wanted to add any compensations or transformations, you can still do the same thing here as you're working through, as well as exporting to a specific gate. We're going to leave those alone and just merge this data file. All right, so then I've created a merged data file. Let me go ahead and grab that folder for you so that you can see what that would look like. And here you go. And so this is just our merged data file, and it's a DNS file. Okay, so now we're working back in the workspace, and we've added these new data files. We have all of this thing kind of building up and looking at how we're working through our data analysis. Now, let's talk about panels, because panels can be a really important piece of how we're working with our data. We want to make sure that when you come into the workspace, you understand a little bit more how things work. So if you see in our data list here, we have iterations, and when they're blue, that means they're active. I can use any of these data files to work through my data set. It's going to move next, next, next. And iteration is just a cool way of saying this is how we're moving your data through your data analysis. When you first bring your data into FCS Express, automatically it assigns one data file to one iteration, so that batch processing knows how to move your data files. But we know that's not always great. Sometimes we need to have a panel because we're looking at 3 data files to make a data set to get all the information. Like if you look in the middle here, I have a control sample, a treatment A and B. So there's going to be like a 3 sample set that would be ideal to look on this page here that I've already built out. So what we can do, we can find panels on multiple different places. One is on the data tab, one is at the bottom of your workspace. I tend to gravitate to the bottom one. It works for me. And I'm just going to use add. Here, I'm going to put a panel name so you can make it as simple or as advanced as you'd like. And then I'm just going to add some 3 tubes here. Now, I do want to talk a moment and talk about these stationary controls because this is really great. We've just added this feature. And what this allows you to do is if we had a control file and we wanted this one file to be used in numerous places, but we wanted to also use all of our other data files, what this helps do is make sure that we can maintain those iterations, maintain how we're using our data, but also have the ability to introduce controls so that we can still see the information that controls provide. Today, I'm not going to be adding any controls, but it's something that would really be beneficial as you're working with your data and you have maybe FMO controls or other controls to help you standardize and optimize your analysis. So we'll click OK here. Now, one thing to recognize also is after I've built a panel, I don't have to commit to life for it. If I decide I'm looking at this and I'm like, yep, don't want to use it, I can just uncheck it. I don't have to rebuild it, recreate it. Just uncheck or recheck when you're going to use it, and you can add multiple. So maybe if you're working through your analysis and not quite sure which is the best strategy, maybe I wanted to do 2 panel tubes, maybe I wanted to do individual, you can flex on this, and you can actually do it in the same workspace. Maybe you want some information to go through every data file and some pages to use the panel. There's different ways that we can really moderate how we're using our data here. So I'm going to click OK to move this to a 3 panel setup. And now my controls and my treatment groups are kind of separated a little bit. So I'm going to move to another important feature about our data list. You're never stuck with how we've decided to bring your data in. We usually do it numeric or kind of have a strategy when we like the order that the data files were in a folder. And that's how we move through things and bring it in. But if you find that something's not in the right place, you can use up, down arrows, and then you can drag. I'm a dragger because it just makes sense. And I like to get it down kind of quickly. If you drag it off to the side, you get this blue line, and then you can drop it, and it's going to move that data file for you. And then I'm going to move to our 4th iteration here so that we're looking at some of these samples. Now it's not yet set up because we were looking at one single sample at the time, but I can just start dragging and dropping now. So I'm going to use my control here, my treatment here, and then my second treatment there. So now once I've got these in place, you can see everything's updated for me. My bar chart has changed according to what's happening here. My spreadsheet down at the bottom has changed, and even my pie chart has also changed with how things are now expressed. Now, I always seem to have the data files that all of a sudden they looked good for like the first one, but then suddenly I need to make some adjustments. So some of the tools that help with managing our data are things like data specific gates. So I can grab a gate and I can make this data specific. So I can move it for this one sample. Maybe this makes more sense, right? And now when I move to my next iteration, so I'm going to move to iteration 5, it's going to put those 3 samples out. It's going to pop back to that universal position. So it will recall the universal position for all of my files, but it will go when I get back to that specific data file, it will jump to the position that I moved it to make that adjustment. Another feature is if you're using a lot of markers and quadrants, we have some other tools that function very similar to that data specific gate. And that would be our iteration snapshots, and that's here in the middle. And so what that does is very similar to what you see with the data specific gate. For each iteration, it will remember gate placements, marker placements, and quadrants placements. Again, just another way to really work with your data, make sure that you can modify as needed, but keep consistency in other places when it's not needed. So now I'm going to move to our histogram. This is also a place where we can do a lot of comparing and contrasting and seeing what's changing between different data samples. I'm not exactly sure which data file is on here, so I'm just going to kind of re-drag all 3. When you drag the first one, you let go and you'll get this add as a new overlay. And you'll see I'm just going to add each of these 3 files onto my workspace here. There we go. And now you can see that my default statistic table has also grown and is showing the new information for each of these different populations that I've added onto my plot. And then when I go back through and I use these 4 through 6, the iterations that are showing different treatments here, I can see those changes quite clearly as I've moved through that. All right. And so now another key feature here, after I'm using my data, sometimes I can get a little bit lost, right? I'm using all this data in a multiple different places and spaces, and it can become like, okay, what happens if somehow I get disconnected? Meaning these iterations turn gray. I'm no longer able to batch through my data. I'm not sure what happened. One of my favorite tools, and I use this quite often, is the Data Navigator. In this Data Navigator, you'll be able to see where information is being used. Where are your data files going? What plots are they being displayed on? You can expand these to see out more information. You see up here, I have a data file here that is no longer in my data list. Actually, I think it's back. I think I just didn't update it. And then I have my data sets here from when we had added all those data sets and then deleted those ones out. This is really helpful when I'm trying to explore what's happening where and when. And it also is very helpful if anytime I see that these have deactivated, because everything downstream, after I've built my analysis layout and I've done my batch actions, everything comes back to the iterations and how we move those data files through our data analysis. Now, furthermore, we are talking about getting more advanced. Every time that we're looking at flow cytometers, we're able to collect more and more parameters. So one of the things that I do want to bring up today also is about our pipelines. So in our transformation window, we have some standard kind of transformations here, and then we have the ability to get very flexible and build our own pipeline. And this makes like a stackable series of events that we take our data through. Now, I'm not going to get too deeply in building out this pipeline piece by piece, but I am going to just show you here how we would get started. So in the new pipeline, we have this section here where we use a template file. So it will start with a file that's already being used. This field will automatically populate with a file that's already being used in my workspace. But if by chance that I want to use something else, I can. So I'm going to actually show you how to break my iterations right now. I'm going to throw this merge data file on here. There we go. And oh, I forgot. I had a trick. So let me back up 1 second. Sometimes in FCS Express, we need a kind of one-off plot. And what I mean by that is that we want to show some information or maybe stack some overlays, but we don't want it to disrupt our iteration. So I've kept everything active here because I had forgotten I had done something to this plot. But if I go and select this plot and then open up my format window, I'm going to show you on specific overlays, sorry, you have the ability to tell FCS Express, like on this plot, I don't want you to try to change it or adapt it when I'm moving between samples or using batch processing. Now, if I turn this back on, you'll see I have deactivated that bottom iteration there. And that's because the software tries to remember the same pattern that you have established when you're using your data files. So if I was using 1 and 4, it would try to keep that pattern as long as it could. And any files that it was no longer able to keep that pattern, it would then deactivate the rest of the iterations like it's done there. So we go back to overlays, oop, there it is, and just uncheck that back so that I can reactivate my iterations, and then we'll return back to our transformation window. So in that pipeline, it will take a file that's actively loaded, but you're not stuck with that. It's not like, okay, that's all you can work with today. You can use this little drop-down menu and you can select from a template file, and that will bring us back to any of the files that we've already been working with or the same folders. Like FCS Express is really great about remembering where you're working so that you're following that pathway without having to re-navigate through all of the steps. But also you can use active data files. So anything that's in the data list now, you can use, or if you have something that you've already built out, maybe even just like a one-off plot like this, you can actually select from a selected plot. So you can use this template from the selected plot. It's going to use this merged data file now, and then I can move through my analysis. In this pipeline, of course, we have plenty of different things that we can work with managing our data, which is super important, right? We want the tools to get the most out of what we're doing, and everything is built right into FCS Express. Why is this beneficial? Because then when I go back and move a gate or have to update things, everything's in the same workspace. I'm not having to go through multiple different software packages to make those adjustments. I can do it all in one place. So you can stack these, and what's beautiful as I'm doing each of these, as I'm moving through any of my pipeline steps, any new parameters that I'm creating, they are also now used. And again, like I had mentioned in the beginning when we were talking about using batch export to create those new data files, I can use that batch exporting, export out with a transformation so my data is now clean, or I have new parameters for UMAP or TISNI, whichever those things are, and create new data files so that the next time I need to do something, I can pop them in and it will conserve all the information and all the work that I've done here. All right. Now, moving into after you create this great analysis strategy, one of the things that we want to do and working on with analysis, right, is getting to those end results. So I've set up some batch actions here to make sure that we can get to those end results and get that information out. Just to touch on, anytime that you build anything in batch actions or panels, you have the ability to check and uncheck. So even if you don't need your PDF, you don't have to delete it out. You can just uncheck it for today. When we do batch processing, it's not going to export anything there. Go ahead and close that window, because what we're going to really go back and focus on is now how FCS Express can work with our data in batch processing. And those are really found in our batch processing options. So we can tell the software how many iterations to be performed. If we wanted to go through all of our different iterations, we are at our seventh here, so six, we can tell it to do automatically. We want them to do all of our iterations. Now, this will always start from where you are in the data list. So it looks like, oh gosh, I have 8 here and I'm seeing 3 here. It's only because of location, location, location. I'm starting at the 6th iteration, so it'll only run 6, 7, and 8. But also, if I'm working with a lot of controls, I have some additional flexibility where I'm like, okay, I know the first 3 iterations, maybe those are all controls. So I only want you to run 4 through 8. So that's going to give me 5 iterations, and I can go back and adjust where I am. So anytime that I need to go back to a different iteration, I can click to that so that I can make sure that I get to those maximums. We can also do things like pausing. Now, pausing can be super important because I seem to always get the data sets where I have 1 or 2 data files that are just a little different, just enough for me to have some cause for concern. And I'm also completely a visual person, so sometimes it's easier to pause on each iteration if I'm working with a smaller data set. So these are kind of ways that we can use our data and optimize how some of the capabilities of FCS Express to really make sure that we're getting what we're expecting, to make sure that things are met before I'm creating a report or to look at them. So these unconditionally pause options are really great. So one is unconditionally pause between each iteration. So as it moved through all of my iterations, it would pause on each one. A second option is to pause if a condition is met. This is great if I'm using like a viability. Maybe that is kind of my standard. I need 80% viability. Otherwise, right? I don't want this to export out, or I want to take a moment and look at it. You can put in some, alerts or things to make sure that if that happens, not only will it, and you move past it, there'll be an alert somewhere in the analysis that says this did not meet the viability criteria, whichever. We can also pause on flagged iterations. This goes back to me having those 1 or 2 samples that are just off a little bit. On our data tab, you can flag an iteration, and then you can also pause on specific iteration. If I've been working with this data set for a while, I seem to remember like, oof, that 22, it's been getting me all day. So you can click that and enter 22, and then you can tell FCS Express how to work through as you're creating these batch options here, or as you're creating those batched reports. So after we've created this, I'm going to go ahead and show you what happens now if I were to take this panel off. I've arranged some things, I've moved some things. And so sometimes when we're working through our data and kind of setting up that analysis strategy, we're using a panel to kind of figure out, yeah, maybe I want to use a panel, maybe not. We're going to kind of review again, like how, if something does become deactivated, how we can fix it. So we're just going to uncheck that panel and click OK, and then see where we are. So right now we have two iterations here, 23 and 24, that are no longer activated. So again, working in our workspace, we can go back and view and go to Data Navigator, and we can see what's happening here. So we have a couple of different treatment files here. We have a couple of different data files on places that we, you know, are using different data as we were kind of working through this analysis strategy. Now we have a couple of options. If I double click on any of my samples, I have this window here where I can change. I have quite a few options, right? And sometimes these can be a little confusing if you're looking at this for the first time. So change all overlays means like on something like my histogram where I had a bunch of different stacked data files. If I select this first object, this first one, it will change all of those overlays on all of my objects. So anything that I've created in the layout this far to the file that I double clicked on. Then I can change overlays, all the overlays on selected objects. So if I had a plot selected, it would only change on that one plot to the selected file. Additionally, you can change base overlay on all objects. So the base overlay is that first one, the first file that makes the histograms or overlay start, or any of the files that are natively on that plot. And then you can do the same thing as change that base overlay on selected objects to selected file. So I'm going to use this first one so that we can kind of streamline this and clear up how the data files are being used right now. And then once it's selected, you can click OK. Now, if you have a strategy here, you'll be able to see that once all of our iterations are made back active, you can see like in some of the places, well, now I don't have a data file, right? I don't have something showing, and that's okay, because you can always correct that again with drag and drop, or just moving through your data files to get to the one that you need to. So moving back to our data files here, we've gone through quite a few things. I do want to add that we do have a defer layout changes. So I'm going to go back and add our panel back and click OK. And what this is useful for is if I have a really big layout and I notice that my data files have come in some weird way that I was unexpected, I can tell the software to give me a moment so I can make changes. Here I can use those up and down arrows to make any adjustments to how my data files are listed, without having to go backwards and kind of start over from the top. I can just move these data files how they need to be reorganized, make those adjustments. Then after I've made those adjustments, I can use the option to play, and it's going to pick up from where I was, right? So it'll make those adjustments. I'll still have my iterations activated, and then as I move through my data set, it's going to move with me. Now, I know I've covered quite a bit here, so I'm going to take a moment just to look in our questions window to see if anybody has any questions for me yet. And it looks like Holly and Greg are doing an amazing job answering questions here. Thank you so much to both of you for that. And then I'm going to move just back into our data files here. So I'm going to actually ask a question so that I can make this a little more user-friendly for you and see if there's any information out there that you want a little bit more on. Is there anything with your data files, either bringing into FCS Express or working with them, that you would like some help with? Is there something that's getting you stuck in your analysis? If you have anything that you kind of is a pain point or any questions, please feel free to put them in the questions window for us. So outside of working with our data and looking at some of the ways that we can organize this data, I'm going to go ahead and go backwards and just add some keywords here and show you some some sorting functions here. So I'm going to do sample ID here and click OK. and then we can add those. So one of the thing also here is in our data list, you can format how things are appearing. If you want to show a flagged column, if you want to show the full path, you can make these adjustments to appearance. If you didn't want to show the iteration column, uncheck and recheck, whichever would suit your needs here. Then I'm going to open this up so that we can see that sample ID here at the end. Now, what's interesting here is any of these new things. So if I again click on this file name here, I can change how everything is ordered. I can also do the same with my sample ID. So I can order my drugs, drug 1 through 9, females, males, and have that split so I can reorganize my data to make sure that I'm getting the most efficiency while I'm working in this space, and I know how to work through my data set. At any time, of course, if you get like, okay, we've made a lot of changes pretty quickly and I've kind of lost my place in my analysis, our undo is going to bring us back to where we were before we started making all those changes. So there's always an easy way back while you're working through your data set. You don't have to worry about getting lost to the point where it's like, oh gosh, it's unrecoverable. I don't know what to do with it. Now, taking that a bit further, after you've created an analysis strategy, I do want to point out that our layouts will remember how you've remembered your parameters by, and this is non-modifiable. So this actually comes up with data files quite often. Be like, Robin, I've created this great analysis strategy, and then I brought in my next data set and it didn't work. What happened? So the name or number option here for our layouts is defined by the instrument. So if we go to our user options here, and we go to this first general options here, you can see that number and name. This is where we select this. And after we've got it selected and create a layout, that is non-modifiable. It's like that layout forever. So if I switch this to number now and click OK, and then go to File and New, when I create this new layout, you're going to see here when I go to the layout options, this is now remembering my number. So if the number of parameters change after you've built a layout in your data files, sometimes that can skew the numbering of the instrument because the instrument doesn't necessarily say, oh, you've added a parameter, I think I should add it at the end. It will add it as the parameter is, as the instrument is designed to do. So sometimes it'll be like you had 13 parameters and they became in a certain order. And when you added this additional parameter, it added it at number 7. So it can throw off your parameters when you come into the workspace and you'll see, okay, this was supposed to be forward scatter and APC, and now it's forward scatter and PE. So name is nice as long as the naming strategy on the instrument doesn't change, because then when you come in here, if you've added a tube or added some new parameters and you're looking kind of expanding your research, it gives you a little flexibility as long as the naming doesn't change on the instrument. It will remember how to find those parameters and you'll be able to bring it in and just keep working from the space that you're in. And I'm going to take another look at our question box here. Oh, okay. I see a great question from James. And it's, can you make user keywords global? So right now we make our keywords to be consistent with the data set, data files that we are working with, meaning we use the file names as an identifier to add those extra keywords. We do have some options where if we're inside of a data file, if we're looking at that view header, we can add keywords here. So you can actually add them to each individual keyword, each individual data file if that's something desired. But I know on a lot of kind of security environments, we don't want to modify that original data. We want to make sure that that original FCS file is unaffected. So that's why we went the route of adding that CSV file and creating extra keywords that way. I know in our upcoming release, we are going to have some additional functionality of keywords and using them in the workspace. So that will be something. And after you create any of our extra keywords files, they are able, you can use this anywhere. So even if I'm in the new workspace, if I go to this new workspace and I add my data files here, any of those keywords that I've already added from this extra keywords table here, I can still use them as I create something new or different. So it does conserve that. So it's just a one-time creation after you've done the extra keywords table. And click OK. Oops, I actually brought it in merged. I do that again here. But that was a great question. Thank you so much, James. And just to show you here, we'll drag out a new data file and look at that view header and all the keywords. And we'll see those concentrations, conditions, and things. So here's the concentration, the condition, the media type, and sample type, sample ID here. So that's one thing that's nice about adding extra keywords that way. And we'll say no here and move back to our original analysis. All right, so I've gone over quite a few things with using data in FCS Express and how to optimize using your data files, help you get organized, looking at some of our user options. And so what I would like to review is just that as we're working through our data, we really want to find the best way through it, one. And then we want to make sure that whatever data management strategy that we have is optimizing our productivity, is increasing our efficiency. We want to make sure that we're making good decisions while we're looking at our data files. And then we want to make sure that it's flexible. Those are things that FCS Express can provide for you. Of course, I wasn't able to cover every data management option available, but I think we've seen quite a few today. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them. It's been a pleasure presenting this webinar to you today, and I'm really grateful for your attendance and attention and also for all the questions that have been asked this far. After the webinar, if you find yourself with some additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us at support@denovosoftware.com. We'll take care of you and get those questions answered, or maybe set up an additional screen share to cover some things that are specific to your research. Also, if you want some additional resources, videos, or webinars, please visit us at denovosoftware.com. And if you haven't done so already, please go ahead and go to our website and grab a free trial to see if FCS Express can really help enhance your data analysis. All right, so we're going to stick around for just a few more minutes to see if anybody has any questions. If you would like to go a couple minutes early, feel free to do so. Um, Thank you again for joining me on today's webinar.